She found him slumped against cold metal and warm blood, holding two babies like they were his last reason to breathe. The kind of October rain that made the docks slippery and soaked through her delivery jacket. Elodie Vance stared through her foggy windshield at the dark warehouses ahead. Her old car's wipers squeaked back and forth. The clock said 1:47 a.m. She'd been working since her morning shift at Romano's diner ended at 2 p.m. 6 hours serving food, then straight to delivering orders around the city. She'd finished 2 years of nursing school before her grandmother got sick. The hospital bills made her quit. Now she waited tables and drove food around instead. Her back hurt. Her last meal was leftover breadsticks from the restaurant, wrapped in napkins in her bag for tomorrow. The delivery app beeped. You have arrived. Loading Dock 7 rear entrance. $50 tip. Please hit the subscribe button. Let's begin. Elodie's shift at the diner had stretched past midnight when the text came through. Her feet screamed in her sneakers, the kind of ache that burrowed into bone after 14 hours of refilling coffee cups and dodging grabby hands for tips that barely covered gas money. She was wiping down the counter when her phone buzzed. An unknown number, an address she didn't recognize, and a promise of $40 for a delivery. $40. That was 2 days of her mother's insulin, or half the electric bill that had turned pink 3 weeks ago. She should have known better. In Port Oleander, money that easy always came with teeth. The GPS led her past the shuttered cannery and the boatyards where rust ate through chain-link fences. The dock materialized from the fog like something out of a nightmare, wooden planks sagging into black water, a single flickering light that barely penetrated the darkness. Her headlights caught the shape first. A man slumped against a shipping container, one hand pressed to his side where dark blood had soaked through his shirt and pooled beneath him. Elodie's nursing school training kicked in before fear could. She was out of the car, her hands already reaching for the pressure points she'd memorized in a classroom that felt like another lifetime ago, back when she'd believed she could actually finish her degree. The man's hand shot up, and suddenly there was a gun, black metal that gleamed in her headlights, pointed straight at her chest. His face was angular and pale, features that might have been handsome if they weren't twisted with pain and something harder. Desperation maybe. Or calculation. Help them, he rasped in accented English, and that's when Elodie saw the bundles beside him. 2 of them wrapped in what looked like someone's jacket. One made a mewling sound that punched through her chest. Babies. Hours old if that. Still sticky with birth, their cords tied off with what looked like shoelaces. The man, Sungjin, he gasped when she demanded his name, had been shot twice. Once through the side, once through the shoulder. He was bleeding out while 2 newborns lay beside him on a dock that reeked of brine and diesel fuel. Elodie's hands moved automatically, applying pressure, elevating the wound, her voice steady even as her mind screamed at the impossibility of it all. She should have called 911. Should have run. Should have done anything except what she did, which was load a dying gangster and 2 newborn twins into her rusted Honda Civic and drive away from that dock like she was fleeing hell itself. The gun stayed in Sungjin's lap the whole way, pointed at her ribs. And $40 sat forgotten in a text message she'd never answered. Elodie's apartment was smaller than Sungjin probably expected. A converted storage loft above a shuttered electronics shop, accessible only by rusted fire escape. She half-dragged, half-carried him up 3 flights, his weight pressing against her shoulder, his breathing shallow and wet. Inside, she kicked aside delivery bags and swept her work table clear with one arm. Packages tumbled to the floor. Someone else's anxiety medication, someone else's contraband memory chips. Sungjin collapsed onto the table with a grunt that might have been a laugh. Cozy, he managed. Shut up. She was already pulling supplies from under the sink. Sewing kit. Vodka. The cheap kind she'd been saving for a particularly bad night. Lighter. Kitchen knife she'd sterilized twice before for this exact scenario, though she'd never actually thought she'd need it. Her hands shook as she cut away his shirt. The wounds were worse in the light. 2 entry points, one clean through the shoulder, the other lodged somewhere beneath his ribs. Blood pooled dark against her table's surface. You've done this before, Sungjin said. Not a question. Twice. Once on myself. She poured vodka over the knife, then over his skin. He hissed through his teeth. This is going to hurt. Already does. She worked by the light of a single overhead bulb, probing for the bullet fragment with hands that remembered her mother's lessons. Steady pressure, clean cuts. Trust your fingers more than your eyes. Sungjin's jaw locked tight, sweat beading across his forehead. When she finally extracted the flattened metal, he let out a breath he'd been holding for minutes. The delivery, she said, threading her sewing needle. Tell me. Hacked. Rerouted. His voice came in fragments. Your insurance. Disposable. The word hit harder than it should have. She'd always known what she was to the system. Hearing it spoken aloud made it real. Who set it up? Don't know. Someone with access. Someone who knew. He winced as she began stitching. Knew I'd be there. And the case. Evidence. Could bring down half the zone's infrastructure. He caught her wrist suddenly, his grip weak but insistent. They'll come for you. You need to run. Elodie looked at him, this bleeding stranger who'd turned her life into a target, and felt something shift beneath her ribs. Not trust. Not quite. But a recognition of shared desperation. I'll run at dawn, she said, tying off the last stitch. Until then we both stay alive. She didn't mention that dawn was only 3 hours away, or that she had nowhere left to run to. Some truths could wait. Sungjin's eyes drifted closed, his breathing finally evening out. Elodie cleaned her hands and sat on the floor beside the table, her knife within reach, listening to the distant sirens that never seemed to stop in Zone 7. The twins had finally fallen asleep, their tiny fists unclenched for the first time in hours. Elodie tucked the blankets around them with practiced efficiency, then turned to check on their father. Sungjin was sitting up now, though the effort cost him. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool mountain air filtering through the window. His shirt hung open where she'd cut it away to tend his wounds, revealing a canvas of ink that covered most of his torso and disappeared beneath the waistband of his pants. She'd seen tattoos before. Tourists loved to show them off in the valley, but these were different. Too precise. Too deliberate. They need names, she said, nodding toward the twins. I can't keep calling them the babies. Minjun, he said quietly, his voice still rough. The boy. And the girl is Haewon. Elodie repeated the names softly, committing them to memory. Their mother died bringing them into this world. The words came out flat, rehearsed, as if he'd said them so many times they'd lost all meaning. 3 days ago. The time frame made Elodie's chest tighten. 3 days of running with newborns. 3 days of grief compressed into survival. I'm sorry. He looked away, jaw working. She was good. Too good for what I am. And what are you? For a long moment he didn't answer. Then slowly he shifted, wincing as he moved. His fingers traced one of the tattoos. A complex pattern of lines and curves that wrapped around his ribs. Do you see it? He asked. Elodie leaned closer, studying the ink. What she'd taken for decorative knotwork resolved into something else entirely. Numbers hidden in the curves. Coordinates tucked into corners. A map drawn in skin. Her breath caught. Those aren't just tattoos. No. His dark eyes met hers, testing, measuring. They're insurance. Account numbers. Routes. Names of people who owe debts. He gestured to another section, this one spiraling across his shoulder. When the syndicate fractured after my father died, everyone wanted what he'd built. But only I knew where everything was hidden. So they're hunting you. They're hunting these. He touched the ink again. Kill me, take photographs, decode everything. Divide the empire. His gaze drifted to the sleeping twins. I thought I could disappear before Yuna's time came. I was wrong. Elodie sank into the chair beside the bed, her mind reeling. He should be afraid. Should be planning how to get him out of her cabin, away from her quiet life. Instead she found herself asking, how many are coming? Enough. He studied her face, something like confusion flickering across his features. You should run. Take what money you need from my bag and go. Where? She gestured out the window at the snow-draped peaks. This is my home. Besides, she glanced at Minjun and Haewon. Someone has to keep those two alive long enough for you to heal. Why? It was a fair question. She didn't have a good answer, just a stubborn certainty settling in her bones. Because, she said finally, I've spent too long watching things die in these mountains. The relative calm lasted 3 days. Elodie first noticed the man in the gray jacket at the market. Then again outside the pharmacy. By the third sighting, near the bus stop 2 blocks from their building, her hands had gone cold despite the summer heat. She bought the formula at a different store than usual, paid cash and took an indirect route home. Her nursing training whispered warnings she tried to ignore. Paranoia is a symptom of trauma, you're just stressed, you're seeing patterns that aren't there. But the formula smelled wrong. She'd opened the canister to prepare the evening bottles when the scent hit her. Faintly chemical, almost sweet beneath the usual powdered milk smell. Her stomach dropped. Sungjin. Her voice came out steady despite the panic clawing up her throat. Don't let them drink this. His eyes, still bruised but healing, met hers with immediate understanding. He'd lived too long in his father's world not to recognize danger. The test bottle she'd already prepared sat on the counter. Hyunwoo reached for it with pudgy fingers. Elodie swept it away so fast the liquid sloshed. No baby. Not this one. She didn't know what poison. Didn't know the dose or mechanism. Her medical knowledge had gaping holes. She'd never finished her degree, had only 2 years of clinical training before everything fell apart. But she knew contaminated formula when she smelled it, and she knew what would happen if the twins drank it. The call came 10 minutes later. Unknown number. Sungjin answered, his jaw tight, and listened to whatever voice slithered through the line. When he hung up, his hand trembled. They know where we are. Elodie's mind raced through options, through escape routes and timelines. How long until they came? How long until? Jihoon made a soft sound. She turned. The baby's lips had a bluish tinge. Asterisk no. No no no. Asterisk. He'd somehow gotten the bottle. Just a few sips while she wasn't looking, while she was focused on the phone call and the threat and everything except the immediate danger right in front of her. Her training kicked in with brutal clarity. She snatched him up, tilted his head back, sealed her mouth over his tiny nose and mouth. The suction was desperate, primal, trying to draw the poison out before it could fully enter his system. Call emergency, she barked at Sungjin, but they both knew the truth. An ambulance would bring questions. Questions would bring his father's people, or worse, the ones who'd poisoned the formula in the first place. Jihoon convulsed. His tiny chest seized. Elodie's fingers found the correct placement. 2 fingers center of the chest, 1/3 depth. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. 30 compressions. Her incomplete education had never covered infant resuscitation with potential poisoning, but she did what she knew, what her hands remembered. Sungjin held Hyunwoo tight, his face gray with helpless horror. Come on, baby, Elodie whispered between compressions. Come on. Jihoon gasped. Coughed. Drew a shuddering breath. She held him against her chest, feeling his heartbeat steady, and understood with perfect clarity. They'd just declared war. And she'd chosen her side. The safe house smelled like mildew and burnt coffee. Elodie sat on a sagging couch while Marcus paced near the window, phone pressed to his ear, his voice a low murmur of coordinates and contingencies. They'd been moving every 6 hours. A motel in Anacostia, an apartment in Shaw, now this cramped row house in Trinidad where the wallpaper peeled like sunburned skin. She should have been exhausted. Instead she felt hollow, scooped clean of everything but forward momentum. We need to move again, Marcus said, ending the call. Storage facility in Brentwood. I've got equipment there. IDs, cash, a clean car. Elodie stood without argument. Movement was easier than stillness, action simpler than thought. The facility was a sprawl of orange doors and fluorescent lights, empty at 2 in the morning except for the hum of security cameras. Marcus led her down a narrow corridor, keys jingling against his palm. Elodie's sneakers squeaked on concrete. Somewhere in the building metal clanged. Marcus stopped. His hand moved to his waistband. Keep walking, he said quietly. But the footsteps were coming from both directions now, quick and coordinated. Marcus shoved her toward an intersecting hallway. Run. She ran. Behind her, voices shouted, not Marcus's voice, others, and then gunfire cracked through the corridor like breaking glass. Elodie rounded a corner and collided with a figure emerging from the shadows. They went down together, a tangle of limbs and panic. The man grabbed her wrist. Elodie twisted, driving her knee up the way Marcus had shown her. But her attacker was already rolling away, scrambling to his feet. Their eyes met under the flickering lights. Ellie. The world tilted. She knew that voice. Knew the scar above his left eyebrow from a bicycle accident when he was 12. Jamal. Her cousin stared at her, his face a portrait of horror. He was thinner than she remembered, older somehow despite only 3 years between them. The gun in his hand trembled. What are you? He looked past her toward the sound of fighting. Jesus Christ, Ellie, what are you doing here? What am I doing? Jamal, I'm a courier, he said, the words tumbling out desperate and ashamed. Just deliveries, I swear. I owed money and they said it was easy work, I didn't know. His eyes widened. You need to leave. Now. Footsteps pounded toward them. Jamal grabbed her arm and hauled her behind a storage unit just as 2 men rounded the corner. He stepped into their path, hands raised. She's not here. Went the other way. One of the men hesitated. The other raised his weapon. Jamal, move. Elodie screamed. The shot was impossibly loud. Jamal staggered backward, red blooming across his shoulder. But he was still moving, still pointing down the wrong corridor, still lying for her as Marcus appeared and returned fire. In the chaos, Jamal met her eyes one last time, a look of profound sorrow, and then he was gone, disappearing into the maze of orange doors and shadows, leaving only blood and questions in his wake. The safe house sat like a forgotten secret on the edge of the Han River, a low-slung bungalow with peeling blue paint and windows that hadn't been cleaned in years. Sung Jin had driven them there in silence, the city's neon glow fading behind them until only the dark ribbon of water remained, reflecting the moon in fractured pieces. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old wood. Elodie sat up at a scarred table near the window while Sung Jin checked the perimeter, his movements methodical, professional. She opened his laptop, her fingers still trembling slightly as she navigated through the encrypted files they'd extracted from the casino's servers. The numbers swam before her eyes at first. Transaction codes, routing numbers, shell company names that meant nothing. But she was good at finding patterns, at seeing the threads that connected seemingly random data points. It was what had made her valuable to her firm back in New York before all of this. Then she saw it. A name buried 3 layers deep in a Luxembourg holding company. Matthew Archambault. Her father. The room tilted. She gripped the edge of the table, her breath catching in her throat. It couldn't be. He'd been gone for 15 years. Vanished when she was 12 without explanation, without goodbye, leaving her mother to piece together a life from the wreckage of his absence. No, she whispered, scrolling frantically through the files. But there it was again. And again. Transaction after transaction, dating back over a decade. Money flowing through accounts he controlled, washed clean through a maze of offshore entities before emerging in the syndicate's legitimate holdings. Her father wasn't dead. He wasn't lost. He was this. You found it. Sung Jin's voice came from behind her, flat and unsurprised. Elodie spun around, her chair scraping against the floor. You knew. You fucking knew. He stepped into the lamplight, his expression unreadable. I suspected. When your name appeared in our initial investigation, the surname was familiar. I confirmed it 2 days ago. And you didn't tell me? Her voice cracked. I needed to be certain. He moved closer and she saw something in his eyes. Not quite sympathy, but something softer than his usual iron control. Your father tried to leave, Elodie. 3 years ago. They reminded him what happened to people who tried to walk away with their secrets. By threatening me. By threatening you. The words hung between them, heavy as stones. Elodie looked back at the screen, at the ghost of her father encoded in stolen money and broken laws. All those years she'd imagined him dead or starting over somewhere far away, living a better life than the one he'd had with them. Instead, he'd been here all along, drowning in the same darkness that was now pulling her under. The warehouse shuddered as the metal door buckled inward. Elodie's breath caught in her throat, her fingers tightening around the crowbar she'd found among the debris. Beside her, Sung Jin checked his weapon with practiced efficiency, his jaw set in a hard line. They found us, she whispered, though she'd known it was only a matter of time. Stay behind me. His voice was flat, final. But when the door exploded open and Deong's men poured through like water breaking a dam, Elodie didn't retreat. She'd spent weeks running, weeks trembling, weeks letting fear dictate every breath. That version of herself felt like a stranger now. The first man came at her with a knife. She swung the crowbar with everything she had, connecting with his wrist. The satisfying crack of bone, his howl of pain. Something savage and ancient awakened inside her. She grabbed a shard of broken glass from the floor, ignoring how it bit into her palm, and used it to slash at another attacker's face. Blood. Chaos. The sharp percussion of gunfire ricocheting off metal beams. Sung Jin moved like a ghost through the melee, but there were too many of them. She saw him take a hit to the shoulder, saw him stumble, and her fury crystallized into something sharp and focused. She wouldn't let them take him. Not after everything. A man grabbed her from behind. She drove her elbow into his solar plexus, stomped on his instep, and when he loosened his grip, she spun and brought the crowbar down across his temple. He crumpled. Through the smoke and violence she saw him. Deong directing his men from the doorway, that same cold calculation in his eyes she'd seen in Sung Jin when they first met. Brothers, forged from the same steel but tempered differently. She moved without thinking, threading through the chaos with singular purpose. When she reached him, she pressed the jagged glass to his throat before his bodyguards could react. "Call them off," she hissed, her voice raw and unrecognizable. "Yao." Daeyoung's eyes widened with something almost like respect. He raised a hand, and the warehouse fell silent except for labored breathing and distant sirens. "You poisoned them," she said, pressing harder. A bead of blood welled against the glass. "Jin Young and Jiwoo." "Why?" His smile was bitter. "My brother loves nothing. Nothing except those children. I wanted him to understand loss. To feel what he's taken from others. They're innocent." Her hand trembled with the effort of not driving the glass deeper. "No one in our family is innocent, Miss Lauren. Not even you. Not anymore." Sung Jin appeared beside her, bloodied but standing. Their eyes met, and in that moment Elodie understood. She'd crossed a line tonight. There was no going back to the woman who'd arrived in Seoul full of idealistic plans. That woman was gone, burned away in iron and fire. The interrogation room was cold, sterile. A sharp contrast to the opulent chambers where Daeyoung had once wielded his influence. Elodie sat across from him, her expression unreadable, while Sung Jin stood in the corner like a sentinel, his jaw tight with barely contained fury. Daeyoung looked smaller now, stripped of his designer suits and confident smirk. His hands were cuffed before him on the metal table, but his eyes still held that calculating gleam, the look of a man who knew he had one card left to play. "Why?" Sung Jin's voice cracked through the silence like a whip. "We trusted you. Father trusted you." A bitter laugh escaped Daeyoung's lips. "Trust? Father never trusted anyone but you. Golden boy Sung Jin who could do no wrong. Who inherited everything while I stood in the shadows, watching." Elodie leaned forward slightly, her detective instincts sharpening. "So this was about jealousy? You endangered an entire organization because you weren't the favorite son. You don't understand what it's like," Deong spat, his composure finally cracking. "To be second always. To have every achievement compared and found wanting. To watch him groom Sung Jin for leadership while treating me like a useful tool." His voice dropped to something raw and painful. "I built half this empire. Me." And he barely acknowledged it. Sung Jin's hands clenched into fists. "So you betrayed us all? Nearly destroyed everything father built." Before Daeyoung could respond, the door burst open. Minseo appeared, her face pale with panic. "We have an emergency. It's Ji-hoon," he collapsed. They rushed him to the clinic. "He's hemorrhaging internally." Elodie's heart stopped. She was moving before conscious thought caught up, Sung Jin right behind her. But Daeyoung's voice stopped them cold. "Wait." His tone had changed completely, stripped of bitterness and calculation. "What's wrong with him?" Minaseo's eyes were wet. "The doctors think it's a blood disorder. Something genetic. He needs a transfusion immediately, but his blood type is rare. We're searching the database, but..." "I'm a match." Daeyoung's words fell like stones into still water. "AB negative like our mother. I'm a match." The room froze. Elodie stared at him, searching for the trick, the angle. But his face showed only grim certainty. Sung Jin's voice was hollow. "You do this? After everything?" Daeyoung met his brother's eyes. "He's my nephew. Whatever poison exists between us doesn't touch him." He paused, something like regret flickering across his features. "I'll save his life. And I'll confess everything, names, connections, all of it. Give you everything you need for the council." "Why?" Elodie demanded. "Because maybe," Deong said quietly, There's still something worth saving in me after all. Within the hour, Ji-hoon was stabilized, Deong's blood flowing through his small veins. And as doctors monitored the child, Deong began to talk, his confession recorded and witnessed. The evidence that would finally bring justice to light. The council chamber smelled of incense and old wood, a deliberate contrast to the steel and glass of modern Seoul outside. 7 elders sat in a semicircle, their faces carved from decades of survival, their eyes weighing Elodie like merchandise at auction. She stood beside Sungjin, the USB drive heavy in her pocket, her pulse steady despite the weight of their scrutiny. "You bring an outsider to sacred ground," the eldest said, his voice like gravel shifting. "Explain why we shouldn't paint these walls with her audacity." Sungjin's jaw tightened, but Elodie stepped forward before he could speak. She'd learned that hesitation read as weakness here, and weakness was a death sentence. "Because your sacred ground is rotting from within," she said, pulling out the drive. "And I'm the only one honest enough to show you the decay." The temperature in the room dropped. Hands moved toward weapons. But the eldest raised one weathered palm, curiosity flickering behind his cold assessment. "Speak quickly." Elodie plugged the drive into the projector. Deong's voice filled the chamber. His recorded confessions, his plans to eliminate Sungjin, his skimming of protection money, his alliance with the Jade Serpents. Financial records scrolled across the screen, millions flowing into offshore accounts while foot soldiers starved on broken promises. The elders' faces remained impassive, but she saw the calculation in their eyes. They were businessmen before they were anything else. "Your organization survives on loyalty," Elodie continued, "but Deong traded that for greed. He's made you vulnerable to rivals, to police, to internal collapse. The question isn't whether I belong here, it's whether you can afford to ignore what I'm telling you." "And what do you want?" another elder asked, leaning forward. "Power? Money? Evolution," Elodie said. She glanced at Sungjin, drawing strength from his steady presence. "I understand both worlds, the streets and this room. I know how to build legitimate fronts, how to manage community relations, how to turn your muscle into influence without constant bloodshed. Sungjin knows operations, loyalty, how to lead. Together we can restructure this. Make it sustainable." "An outsider and a soldier," the eldest mused. "You ask us to abandon tradition. I ask you to survive it," Elodie countered. "The old ways are dying. The choice is whether you die with them or adapt." Silence stretched taut. Then the eldest nodded slowly, a decision made with the weight of empire behind it. "Deong will answer for his betrayal," he said. "And you, outsider, will prove your worth. Sungjin leads operations. You build the future. Fail and the price will be measured in blood." Elodie bowed, relief and terror warring in her chest. "We won't fail." As they left the chamber, Sungjin's hand found hers briefly, a silent acknowledgement of the impossible thing they'd just accomplished. The real work was only beginning. The morning sun filtered through bulletproof glass, casting geometric patterns across the nursery floor. Elodie adjusted Maya in her arms while Sungjin settled Miho into his high chair, their movements synchronized after 3 months of practice. The compound was quiet at this hour, before the security rotations changed and the legitimate business calls began. "Your turn for applesauce duty," Sungjin said, pressing a kiss to her temple before handing her the bowl. Elodie smiled, spooning the puree toward Miho's eager mouth. Half of it ended up on his chin. Maya gurgled from her bouncer, reaching for the morning light. These were the moments that felt most surreal, not the money transfers she managed from her encrypted laptop, not the strategy sessions with Sungjin's lieutenants, but this. Domesticity built on a foundation of organized crime and unconditional love. Her phone buzzed. A text from Jamal. *made supervisor. "Thanks again cuz." She'd gotten him the job at their legitimate security company 2 months ago, after he'd completed rehab. Watching him show up sober, rebuilding his life, filled a hollow space she hadn't realized existed. Her mother's medical bills were paid in full now, the collection calls finally silent. The MBA program she'd enrolled in, officially funded by consulting work, would start in January. "What are you thinking about?" Sungjin asked, reading her expression the way he always did. "How nothing turned out the way I expected." Elodie wiped Miho's face, then met Sungjin's eyes. 3 months ago I was invisible. Just another waitress serving drinks to people who'd never remember my face. I remembered. You did. She stood, lifting Maya from her bouncer. The baby nestled against her shoulder with perfect trust. I spent so long running from everything, from debt, from responsibility, from myself. And now you're running an empire's financial strategy and raising twins, Sungjin finished, taking Maya so Elodie could collect Miho. While studying for an MBA and keeping your cousin employed. Our empire, she corrected. Our twins. The distinction mattered. She wasn't just Sungjin's partner in business or his lover. She was integral to something larger. The family she'd found here wasn't bound by blood but by choice, by loyalty forged in crisis and strengthened through trust. She belonged in a way she never had before. Miho grabbed her finger, his grip surprisingly strong. Maya cooed from Sungjin's arms. Outside, security guards changed shifts with military precision. Somewhere in the compound, encrypted servers hummed with legitimate transactions and careful money laundering. Her laptop waited with financial projections that would shape the organization's next quarter. Elodie had stopped running. Instead, she was building something. A life, a family, a future balanced precariously between darkness and light. It wasn't the life she'd imagined, but standing here with Sungjin and the twins in their fortress of bulletproof glass and unconditional love, she couldn't imagine wanting anything else. Ready for today's strategy meeting? Sungjin asked. Elodie smiled, kissing Miho's forehead. Always.